Welcome to Copycats, the podcast uncovering the science and arts behind copywriting and content design. Today's guest is on a quest to empower accessibility. He doesn't just talk it, he lives it. He's a visionary behind Accessible Me, an organization dedicated to creating a more inclusive world. Whether he's challenging design norms, empowering teams, or reshaping how we think about digital equity, he brings clarity, compassion, and a whole lot of momentum to the conversation. And he joins us today to talk about what drives his mission and the practical shifts that can make products more human and how inclusive content can be truly achieved. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to introduce to the pod Mike Osborne. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew. I really appreciate you.
Great to have you here. So let's start with basics. As ever, could you tell us a bit about your background and why you love your job so much?
I absolutely can. So, growing up as a young lad, I was absolutely inspired by the CGI in Toy Story and Jurassic Park, and I was going to be an animator working for Pixar. Um, Oddly, though, or not unsurprisingly, my career didn't quite go in that direction. I did get to do my GCSE work experience at a games company. My degree is actually in video games technology, and by that stage, I wanted to make the next Assassin's Creed. But again, my career didn't quite go in that direction. Now, if I rewind the clock, I'm the eldest of three boys. My two brothers showed signs of having Tourette's early on, and I not I'm ashamed to say this, but as brothers do, I didn't know what Tourette's was at the time. It was just a habit. I teased them for it, so it's almost fitting then that around the age of 14 or 15, where they grow out as so many kids with Tourette's do. I was heading home with my friend one day when my arm suddenly shot to the right, and I remember quite thinking, that's weird. Little did I know that was actually going to be the start of my motor tics. About a year after or so, my vocal tics started as well. And as you can imagine, being a teenager when there's enough changes going on in your life,
Not
suddenly,
ideal.
yeah, not ideal. Now, I later in my career, I've since through a coach who was autistic, found out about the that I also have autism, which I've explored. And more recently, in therapy sessions, I've come across my ADHD side as well. So I describe myself as a neurodivergent cocktail of Tourette's, ADHD, and autism, severe depression, and severe anxiety. And that drives a lot of what I do. One of my earliest experiences, though, is when I was around the age of 7 or 8, I was at school, sat next to my best friend, and he drew this amazing picture of Scooby Doo, and I remember looking over a short period after, and he'd coloured Scooby in green. Now, not knowing anything about disabilities at the time or other disabilities, I remember going, "Oh, why did you do that for?" And my best friend, he got quite upset, and I felt terrible. I'd upset my best friend just by asking a question. That was when I discovered he was red-green colorblind. So he knew Scooby should be brown, he just couldn't see the difference. Now, that year for his birthday, I bought him a pack of Crayola pencils. And the lovely thing about those is they've got the name of the color printed on the side. And even to this day, we're both approaching 35 now. He says it's one of the most thoughtful gifts he's ever received. Now, to me, it's just pencils. But he now works in the public sector, and simple things like going to the toilet, which should be a simple, basic human right, or human need. When he uses a public bathroom, if they simply have one of those red lock, green locks, he still has to push the door to see whether it's is available or not. And if you compare and contrast that to the locks you might see on an aircraft where they have the words vacant and occupied, or better still, a red locked padlock and a green unlocked padlock, once again you'd be speaking to a universal audience, on making something much more accessible. My father-in-law is blue-green colorblind, and much like with my friend, where we play games like Uno or Blokus, my father-in-law will put a card down quite confidently in a strategy, revealing his hand and kind of disrupting the game. My first experience with accessibility, though, was part of my degree. So while I was studying, I took part in a few game jams. For those who don't know what a game jam is, it's a bit like a hackathon. You get together with a group of people you've never worked before, and you get to create something awesome within the time limit. So in this case, 48 hours. And this particular year, Aardman Animations, the people behind Wallace and Gromit and Chicken Run, they set the challenge of how many accessibility features can you work into your game within the 48 hours? Now, my team didn't win, and that was the first time I come across the term accessibility, but I was absolutely blown away by how much could be achieved if you factor accessibility into the design of your games right from the start. So even though I was very late to my final year back in 2012, I was inspired and I changed my dissertation piece to focus on accessibility. Now, if you fast forward the clock again, in 2017, I did a blog on designing for people with colorblind who are colorblind, inspired by my friend, inspired by my father-in-law. And when I logged into LinkedIn the next day, is that one of those unusual situations where I had a number of notifications. This thing had gone quite popular, and people were commenting saying, Mike, this is brilliant. I've got someone who is deaf coming up on one of my courses. How would I design for them? And I was thinking, well, I don't know. I'm not the authority on all these different conditions, but what I can do is I can go away and have the conversation. That's exactly what I did. I went away and speak to different individuals. And in 2020, then I was selected as one of the UK's learning technology's first 30 under 30, a watch list on people who are going to potentially change and have an impact on the industry. And then from there, I joined a new company called Upskill Digital, and they did a lot on it's a black owned business. And when I went on the website, it was a no-brainer for me on why I should join them. There are people openly gay, openly trans, people with different disabilities, and I knew like. Yeah, this is somewhere I'm going to make a difference. They were already doing lots on helping people with different ethnicities, helping women into leadership, and they weren't yet doing much on helping people with disabilities. And I thought, hey, here's a gap I can plug. And during that time I spent with Upskill, I got to work on some amazing projects. I audited content for the likes of BT, for the likes of Google, and then fast forward to now, I decided, okay, I found what I want to do at last. So coming back to full circle to your question on why I do what I do, my goal at Accessible Me is to make all of the world's content and all of the world's spaces accessible to people with disabilities. So, unlike some of our competitors, we're not just a digital accessibility company. I'm looking kind of holistically at the end-to-end user experience, everything from how do they find out about you? So, imagine this podcast. If you're doing YouTube videos or Instagram videos on finding you. Are you using alternative text on the images and so are the colors uh, do they have a strong enough contrast? So we look at okay that discovery phase, then we look at what's the experience with you. So in this podcast setting, it might be do we have transcripts? Do we have captions? Can people follow along? And then we look at any follow-ups. So, those are the surveys that go out. Hey, what did you think of the podcast? And trying to find what those things are. We look at end to end on that journey, and then we help organizations make their content more accessible to people with disabilities. Is something that gets me out of bed in the morning. And in October 2024, so last year, I was up in Edinburgh where we were launching Allyship, our accessibility themed escape room. And when we were exploring Edinburgh, because we didn't get to go often, I'd taken my family up. My daughter was with us when she came across this homeless man. He was sat outside a telephone box and he was hungry. And she looked at us and she said, Dad, can we give him some of the food that we had? We had some leftover pizza. And shortly after that, she was saying, I want to be like you when I grow up. So I don't necessarily want to help people with disabilities because I think that's important, but I want to end homelessness. So the fact that what I am doing to helping people with disabilities has given her this kind of mission, this drive. really kind of encourages me to do more. Now, I'm a father myself. Um, I suspect my daughter has autism and my son has ADHD. And I want to create a world where when they go to school, where they have their interviews, the world is going to be a more inclusive place, whether that's the onboarding, whether that's the jobs they can apply to. But I want to make sure that when they are in the workplace, more than just the training on accessibility or inclusion and diversity inclusion, more than just that is accessible. I want to make sure that the leadership training is accessible. I want to make sure that there's no barriers for people like myself and anyone with a disability that they might have experienced in the workplace can go into the workplace, and there should be no reason why, if you have a limb difference, if you are deaf or hard of hearing, if you are blind, why you couldn't be the CEO of one of those FTSE 500 companies. And society needs to change. There's a whole lot that needs to change at the moment, and my goal, my ambition is to make that happen.
So amazing. And you went from teasing your brother to becoming a neurodiverse superhero. And I had an inkling, a small inkling, that when someone's that invested to go ahead and create an organization like Accessible Me, that there must be quite a personal story behind it. And how? Okay, so let's talk about Accessible Me. Going back to that, I came across you through your webinars. There's a series of webinars that cover quite a rich, broad range, I should say, of subjects, from content designing for people with deaf to hearing biases to, I think there's one on mental health as well. And they're
Yeah, that's
monthly, right?
October one.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about those and why are they free?
Sure. So they are part of our Inclusive Insights series. They are free because ultimately it's about reach. My goal isn't necessarily to make millions, although who wouldn't want to. My wife is a big fan of that program you might have seen on TV, Chateau DIY, and if I can support that lifestyle, so we retire the chateau, great. But that's not what it's all about for me. So I'm a recognized speaker at a number of events like Learning Technologies, um, some of these other events as well. And one of the things I say is, if just 10 in every 100 people I reach go away and make 2 or 3 changes, the ripple effect is gonna be quite huge, gonna be significant. So for me, it's not about making millions, it's about helping millions. And when it comes to pricing, ultimately, it's for a lot of people, it starts with awareness. People often don't design to exclude. They're not aware they are doing it. And what I don't want to do is to put in these big price points in place, to say, oh, if you are passionate about removing these barriers for people with disabilities, pay 250 quid and join us for this 1 hour session. If if these 1 hour sessions aren't about getting everyone to the top of the ladder in terms of accessibility mastery, is about helping people take that first step or getting at least 1 or 2 steps up on the ladder from where they currently might be.
Right.
So, and also it gives me a chance to kind of practice that public speaking, something that 5 years ago would have been terrifying for me. Uh, but also I get to test the different concepts and I learn. So especially these panel discussions, I have been lobbying a lot of these like big events companies to go, yes, I am a person with autism or I'm a person with ADHD. I'm otherwise an able-bodied white man, whose parents grew up together until his early 20s. My experiences as someone with those conditions aren't going to be the same as someone else who might be otherwise able-bodied white man, but they're certainly not going to be the same of, if you have a limb difference or if you are of a certain religion or a different race, and you have some of these conditions. I think intersectionality comes into play a lot. And what I wanted to get these companies doing is to allow me to chair a session with people with a whole host of different disabilities. Because whilst I do consider myself an expert on accessibility, I'm not an expert on every individual's own lived experiences. They are the experts. And so I invite individuals to come onto the podcast to share their lived experiences because I think there is power in stories. It's about
Yeah.
give. I've been very conscious in building my network. I now have over 10,000 followers on LinkedIn and over 2,000 followers on the Accessible Me company page. Some of our guests have large followings, some of them have next to no following, but this is about giving people a voice, giving them an opportunity to share their story and go, okay, what barriers do you experience in the workplace? But also, what helps you? This isn't a kind of a moan at a business to go, hey, you didn't cater for me. It's an opportunity for the listeners who do join a podcast to go, actually, yes, no, I see this in our workplace. Whether you are the owner of a company joining our webinars to learn more about what you can do, or whether you go someone joining our webinars and going, oh, I didn't realize that me bringing in this strong smelling tuna salad at lunchtime and sitting next to my colleague who I suspect has autism, triggering those kind of heightened, senses. Um, it's it's about having that awareness and people just taking some practical steps. So these are often a taster. There's only so much you can change in terms of behavior change in those hour sessions. They are always 12 to 1 p.m. Over lunchtime. People don't have to necessarily cancel meetings or avoid taking meetings in that time. Quite often they can join in their lunch break and hopefully walk away with something that they can apply immediately.
Okay. So let's talk specifics of inclusive design, right? Content design. How do some of the key, I guess, considerations around inclusive design translate into a positive experience when it comes to content and content design for you?
So quite often the assumption you hear is it, by not being able to do drag and drop or by not being able to do certain elements, that my experience is going to be a lesser experience. And quite often the alternative experience that a lot of people with disabilities get is a PDF transcript. And we can do so much more. Now, if you look at some of these accessibility features, the drop curb was an accessibility feature so that people with wheelchair and limited mobility can can navigate more easily. Now, imagine you're leaving the airport with one of these heavy suitcases behind you, and there is no drop curb. So you pull that suitcase off the curb, and the wheels hit the floor. You're going to have some damage there. So I think, or if you're twins and you're pushing your twins in one of those double prams and there's no drop curb, all of these things, it's a simple notion of these accessibility features actually go a long way to making life better for everyone. The electric toothbrush is another one. The electric toothbrush was originally a accessibility feature for people with limited mobility, and now it is mainstream. And what you'll find is, yes, these accessibility fixes help people with disabilities, and that's fantastic, but they do so much more than that. So if I take, for example, the way that Google works and how your website ranks on Google, Google's crawlers, those things that go around and crawl on the web, they are deaf bots and they are blind bots. They can either hear and they certainly can't see it. So if you don't have things like transcripts, if you don't have things like captions or text alternatives, those things as well not be there on the website. So not only are you helping people with screen readers when you're doing that, you're actually helping yourselves. You're helping your business to grow in an organic way and making a big difference there. So ultimately, one of the things I try and always get people to think about is, yes, it helps the people with individuals with accessibility, absolutely. But if you go beyond that to look at universal design, actually what you're doing has a big reach, and accessible design is better design for everyone.
Absolutely. I think that's goes without question. Do you find that people who come to you for help through your business are advocates already of inclusive design and just want to be able to make sure that they're doing the right things, or are there some people who are kind of intrigued by what the possibilities might be and aren't so clued up?
We have both. So sometimes, so quite often it's middle managers. So sometimes it's people who either go, I need to convince leadership that I need to get some money to spend on this, or they have a who are going, we're already busy. Why are you asking us to do this as well? You know, and so quite often, yes, we have advocates. We get a lot of advocates. We certainly since we've been doing the webinars and things like that, we're getting quite job requests almost daily. People asking, "Hey, how can I work with you? Because I'd love to make a difference." And I absolutely love that. And as we are in to grow the business beyond what we're already doing, you know, uh, those are definitely things I want to be able to entertain. But yeah, quite often we are getting people interested in accessibility because they think it's the right thing to do, but also the European Accessibility Act come into effect in June this year. In April 2026, the Americans with Disability Act type will come into effect. So again, there's elements of compliance, people fearing the stick, and there's people chasing the carrot because they know it's the good thing to do. So there's definitely both sides of that coin.
But the outcome of both is that they're coming to you and making difference and making improvements what they do, which is the main thing, which is great. Okay. And so let's talk about the difference between accessibility and inclusive design, because bit of a muddy water for some people to get their head around. In a nutshell, what's the difference, Mike?
In a nutshell, accessibility is designing for people with disabilities. Inclusive design goes beyond that. So, to give an example, many of you, if you're interested in accessibility, might be familiar with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short. You can hit all of the WCAG criteria and still not have an inclusive experience because you're using ableist language or gendered language, and you have other blockers in place. So accessibility is part of inclusion, but I wouldn't say accessibility is inclusive design in its own right. And I think that's where the distinction would lie. You know, it's what is part of the conversation is not the whole conversation, and but it's one that inspires me. Is it gets me out of bed in the morning, and is a conversation I want to keep having.
And by that logic, I would expect, because I've not heard so much around the conversation of inclusive design, maybe over the past 2, 3 years versus accessibility. Accessibility gets much more of the press, if you like. So then, by that logic, I would expect there to be inclusivity teams who do accessibility. Or am I thinking in very simplistic terms there?
No, you're absolutely right, and they're so I think it's vital to have accessibility teams, but the trouble with having accessibility focused roles is it almost becomes someone else's responsibility then, whereas accessibility should be everyone's responsibility. Same as inclusion should be everyone's responsibilities. And what saddens me is when I see these employee resource groups played off against each other. So, you know, hey, we have some budget that the team could spend some money on, you know, on these accessibility initiatives, or they can go and spend it on, you know, the Black History Month, or you know, this other campaign, a- and if and I use this analogy sometimes. You know, when the when Daniel Craig stepped down as James Bond, a lot of the headlines said the next James Bond could be black or it could be a woman. And one of the sarcastic
Choose
comments
one.
on that was, you know, yeah, well, one of the sarcastic comments on that was, "What a shame if you're a black woman, because it should be both." Now, I think your point around inclusion themes, I think too often there are these boxes that, you know, and I think people often think in boxes. So, oh, we can do it accessibility. So this is Purple Pound Month. This is like for a disability. Whereas I think we need to be thinking more holistically. You know, we need to be going, okay, if you are a under like a black female, maybe you've been injured by the Ukrainian bombing, for example. Now you've got damage to your sight, your hearing, and your limb difference. Again, why shouldn't this individual be in charge of a FTSE 500 company? We need to be thinking about inclusion more holistically, so that when we do the audits, you go on the website and you see yourself represented. So no more diversity and inclusion, but more diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Because even if you've got the captions on everything and all these different languages, if you have vitiligo, for example, do you know where you have some patches on your skin? If there's nobody that looks like you on the website, if the website is just teenagers having fun, do you know, or
Mm.
people in their early 20s, and there's no people with grey hair, there's no people with burqas or do you know limb differences, do you know, are you going to feel that I belong in this organization? Do you know, I think marketing teams like these different clothing brands are starting to recognize that they're starting to get it right, but other organizations, other industries are still lagging behind on that front, and that's representation. If people don't, people need to, I think we're starting to see now a recognition that people won't buy if they don't see themselves. And I think the same is true. Are you going to be likely to apply for that company if there is nobody that looks like you as you're navigating through the pages on the website? Do you know, like
Mm.
that's where there's still a while to go, and that doesn't matter whether that's disability, do you know, gender, orientation, any of those different protected characteristics. Um, and it shouldn't be all. You should be able to tick every one of those protected characteristic box and still have no difficulty getting the job. Do you know, just because of what you think, what you believe, and how you look, how you act.
Makes sense. And when was the last time you were blown away by a content experience through what they managed to do through inclusive design?
Last time I was blown away, I think it was when I did a audit actually of some of their content, and I was blown away by how much thought had already been done. Do you know, so it wasn't a audit from a compliance perspective. They come to us and said, "We actually think we are pretty good, but you know, we are getting this content audited because." We know it can be better. So, do you know, if there is anything that you think we can still do, um, do do continue to do that. The games industry is very much one where they are pushing the envelope sometimes, you know, in terms of what's achievable. So people doing these audio only experiences or doing different creative solutions that you know other industries can learn from. I think those things really excite me.
Brilliant. And what kind of relationship do you have with AI right now? Because that is the major discussion right now, the most disruptive technology going. And how does that impact inclusive design, maybe in a positive or negative way?
AI is going to, I think, AI is a just, but it's here. And I think all of us have to recognize that if laws were in place tomorrow to shut these generative AI technologies down, it's just going to go underground. You know, these things aren't going away; they are here to stay. In terms of the application to accessibility and inclusion, then it definitely has some benefits. So, for example, there is an effort by AI on a lot of tools now to give an image at least some captions. It will generally flag it and say this alternative text will AI generated. And if you think about the user experience, if that's on every image on your website, it doesn't look like you put that much effort into the user's experience. So don't think AI is going to be a kind of one size fits all. And I think the other aspect then I one of our most recent webinars explored AI and British Sign Language, for example. So there's definitely some applications, but if these developments are happening without people with disabilities being consulted, the potential to widen the gap is there. The other thing I think as well is people using accessibility to fix things. And I think learning development is one of those industries where there is going to be a lot of change. Why should I spend money on a course when I can get AI to educate me or my team on these things. So and ultimately it's these AI tools don't have the lived experiences. They don't have the specific insights. But I what excites me is rather than is the vision that rather than these classrooms where you have one or two teachers to a classroom of 30 individuals, if you can have each individual with an AI coach that is adapting to go, okay, you haven't understood how to do the problem this way. Can we try this and try a different approach? Let's present the content to you in a video, or let's make it a game. Do you
Mm.
know the potential for where education could go, and where you could have avatars that look like you. And I don't mean, literally use the camera and reflect you as the avatar talking to you on the screen, but just if I am selling content to Saudi Arabia, there's no good it looking like me because it's not necessarily going to resonate with that audience. So
Mm.
if I can have the avatar that looks like the individual taking that training
Yeah.
and localizing it, the theory is going to be the same. So the contrast, it doesn't matter what country you're in, what language you speak, a lot of those accessibility principles remain the same, but the ability to localize and to have things in every language and in British Sign Language and American Sign Language and all those different things. So that's the future. We're a long way off from that, but if that's a future where we're heading, where there are no barriers, and if you're someone who's deafblind, the content still adapts and still gives you an amazing experience rather than just the basics. I think, yeah, there's definitely room to be excited as well as be scared.
Okay. Let's get into some quick fire questions for your
Designer's
designer's
Toolkit.
toolkit, Mike. So, one content or design tool you cannot live without.
Eight shapes. If you Google eight shapes grid, you might be familiar with the web tool on contrast already. Eight shapes is fantastic because you can put all your whole brand guidelines in terms of the colors on there, and you get a rid of yes, these color combinations work, these color
Mm.
combinations don't. So it's a no-brainer for me.
Tremendous. One content tool you could do with that does not exist yet.
Oh, I think that's one of those AI branching scenarios. So I mentioned earlier that my goal would be to design for somebody who might be deafblind. So I've designed for people who are deaf, and I've designed for people who are blind. I think we now live in a world where because there's AI, you could take any content, whether that's how to be a space engineer to how to make your content more accessible. You can print that to a braille printer and have a basic input device and drive the scenario in an immersive way so that when you log in it goes, welcome back, Mike, how long do you have to learn today? And if I have 5 minutes or I have an hour, I can let it know and it can adapt the content to me. It can also go, are you looking for a basic awareness of this, or are you looking to get like a master's degree? And again, it can adapt. So I think we have a world where there's a wealth of information out there, and to have a tool that can adapt the training to what you need and when you need it, that's what's missing. And I believe it's where we're heading eventually, but we're a long way off that yet.
Love that. If you find it before it becomes commercially available, let me know. One food or drink that really fuels your creativity.
I'm a cup of tea for person through and through. So when individuals say, "Let's meet over a coffee," I'm almost smiling because if it's before 3 p.m., it's going to be a cup of tea. If it's after 3 p.m., it'll be a hot chocolate. I'm a bit weird like that. That may be an autism thing. I don't know.
What flavors of tea?
Standard Yorkshire tea has got to be.
Standard Yorkshire. Okay, fair enough. Okay, part three, your unpopular opinion. This is where we ask you to share a controversial or divisive take on something content related.
Unpopular opinion.
I think it's this notion that AI is going to solve anything, and that there are budget for these things like accessibility. I think COVID it was a fantastic example of going, look, if we care about something, we can solve it quickly. We got the Pfizer, we got the vaccines quickly. Yet there we have oceans where there are um, plastic and waste bigger than some countries. We have we're still using fossil fuels and all these different things. Like if we truly cared about sorting the environmental issues, then the options are there, the choices there, and it saddens me that it takes YouTubers. I forget his name now, but it takes people like YouTubers and influencers to go out and tidy our oceans and do more in a month with their earnings than our politicians and our countries. I think it's is 2025. We have the tools. There's no excuse for it. And I think the other one would just be we need to be mindful. We really do of using AI so excessively. If you look at the power it takes to power every single ChatGPT query. I was so excited to see the companies on track to meet their climate change targets, their net zero targets, and all of that seems to be going out the window now that we're using these ChatGPT tools that take just so much power to make those images, and the usage of these apps are going up. I think that the same level of care in should we use them is not there.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Final part of the
It's
podcast
the word on the street.
is what we call word on the street, Mike. So please let me know what's your most overused word.
My most overwhelmed user. Oh, I think my most used word is probably cuppa. It'd be one of those. If I'm flustered or anything else, I can message the wife, or if I'm in the office, I can message my colleagues and go cuppa. Just take that break away from the screen, and I think there's very little that can be solved by a cup of tea.
I'll suggest that cuppa is a very inclusive word to have. So not the
Assuming you like tea or hot drinks, but it
this is
doesn't have
this
to be
is
a cup of
true.
tea. It could be a cold one.
This is
Yeah.
true. We need to consider those who prefer coffee. All right. And if you could permanently ban one word from public use, or at least maybe reduce its usage significantly, what would it be and why?
It's gonna be neurospicy. I've got no problem with people self-identifying with neurospicy, but don't call me it, please.
You're very spicy. Not heard that one.
Yeah, if you kind of Google it, it seems to be an increasing usage, and yeah, it's not one I'm a fan of.
You're trying to can that one. Okay, fantastic. Well, Mike Osborne, you have been an absolute star. You've taught me so much. I'm going to go away and make sure that I am being as inclusive and as accessible as I can be, including using transcripts. I'd like to thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.